really happy to introduce tonight Jenny Tsai. Jenny's a designer with a background in mathematics and spatial art, which I almost want you to just talk about that for an hour, but I'm going to do something else. This spring, she co-founded MoCA, a social learning tool, and mentored at Technovation to help foster project-based education. Jenny started her UX career at a small startup called BayCHI Incorporated in Menlo Park, California. I don't know if any of you out there remember the BOS like I do, but it was a thing. And currently designs experiences through research, prototyping, and user feedback. Jenny has a bachelor's degree in mathematics from the University of Chicago with a minor in computer science and a BA in spatial art from San Jose State University's School of Art and Design. Not Santa Fe. Jenny's going to be talking about this concept of design for one and design for the many. She and I have been discussing the topic, and it's an interesting lead-in to maybe a larger conversation. So please give a big warm welcome to Jenny Tsai.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to use this microphone. Hello? Perfect. No, this would only stay on my jacket. Okay, so design for one and design for many. Thank you for being here tonight. As Christian said, I'm a user experience designer. And I first met UX design through consumer devices. My first job was at a small startup called BayCHI, and we were making internet appliances back in 2001. And then Palm, this PDA making company, actually acquired BayCHI, so then we were making Palm OS powered devices. And then after that, I actually studied spatial art, or also known as interactive environments, in art school. And I finished with an internship at the Exploratorium. So when I was at the Exploratorium, we studied how people interact and learn mathematics in a geometric environment. And the exhibit is called Geometry Playground. It's still traveling the country, and you can see it. So I'm going to move over to a slide that has some of my work. You can see that, it started out with BayCHI, Palm, art school, Exploratorium. And then the last couple of years, I've actually mostly been working with startups making mobile applications with lots and lots of users. The last couple of applications I've worked on, there were probably 300 to 400,000 users for each of the apps. So it required me to look really closely at user behavior and user data. It's one of those things that's very interesting because most of the applications I worked on were connected in the sense that they were not standalone applications. If you're thinking about, your standard note-taking app on your Palm device, it was taking down your notes for you and storing them so you could recall them, but it wasn't connected to anything. There's no share mode. There's no sending this note to somebody mode. It just worked perfectly alone as its own standalone app. Most of the applications that I've been working on are, the opposite. There's what you can do with it as a person, and there's also what you can do with it with more than one. So I'm going to talk about that. That's sort of like a design challenge that keeps coming back. So recurring design challenge, serving individual and group experiences in the same product. You can start talking in terms of exhibits and some of the social games that I've worked on, which is, what does an individual player need in order to play? And what do multiple players need to be able to play? Very basic tools that individual players need to play is they need to know where they are in the game, how much resources they have, what they can do, what they cannot do, how they talk to other users. And everybody pretty much needs to be able to see, if it's a board game, then they need to be able to see a map of how the game is progressing. Or if it is Farmville, then they need to be able to see the farm. So something central so that everybody can have, this is what's going on right now. Same thing with education, which is when you were in a class, there's always the balancing of, what does the individual student need to learn, and how can they do this, and what does the class need to learn. So on top of my design work, I've actually done a lot of teaching, which is I've taught at Railsbridge to help women and minorities learn how to code. And I've also TA'd at a couple of just General Assembly and mentored at Technovation just to see how people can teach each other to learn to build things and design things. So I'm gonna actually just really quickly say that when you have to serve both individuals and a group within the same product, it's really helpful to have common signs and symbols that everybody can agree on. And this is something that I will talk about later on the talk. And it's also really nice to have shared goals. So for instance, in the game, maybe you all want to play together. And for, like an educational project, maybe you all want to learn the same thing, or maybe you all want to comment on the same video. All right, so yes, what if we just don't differentiate between individual and group experiences? What if we just try to think, well, you know what works for like a single, person, might work as a connected experience. You can take an example, which is Facebook. Facebook has pages for individuals, and it also has pages for organizations and businesses. It may not be very obvious immediately, but there are definitely actions and affordances or clues on the pages for organizations that are not present. And the reason for this is, if you don't think about, the difference between individual and group experiences, then, well, that's okay. But, there are things like trolling and processing delays, confusions, and I would say, again, especially in education, one size doesn't always fit all. Not everybody wants to learn the same thing, or not everyone is able to learn things at the same pace. So, if we just take a little bit of time to think about individual versus group experiences, it's almost always worth it. And to look at this, I decided that it would be interesting to look at disciplines like transportation, architecture, education, and retail, and entertainment are actually some of the other ones that are really interesting. Essentially, the goal is to understand decisions and trade-offs from disciplines that have had to balance individual and group experiences over long periods of time. And I want to say right now that this is actually something that I just started exploring, and Christian has actually been really great in helping me look at what are the things that we really want to nail down on. So if anybody has anything interesting as a result of seeing what I'm going to show next, please feel free to chime in or show me later. I would love to have all of your sources and ideas. Okay, so this is Market Street, San Francisco. So Market Street in 2013 is designed for pedestrians, bicycles, cars, buses, trains, and lots of things. They're all going in this bi-directional path, and there are a lot of things here. Next, I'm going to show you actually Market Street in 1906. This is actually, if any of you have been to the Cable Car Museum in San Francisco, there is a video that shows the Market Street traffic just before the earthquake. And you can see that there's bicycles, there's pedestrians, there's sometimes even carriages, cable cars, and they're all going in different directions. And it's very interesting because, just like Market Street today, you can definitely get from point A to point B. So the road moves. But the question is, if you are, say, a pedestrian, how much visibility do you have and how much safety do you have? Or if you are not the largest cars, so I guess at this moment, the largest car is probably one of these cable cars, then everything else is sort of a haze and you can't really see what's going on. Right, so Market Street today, same road, serving multiple types of travelers and experiences on the same path. Now we are having a much more heavily regulated street, which is there's the addition of traffic and road signs, signals, and designated crossings. Now this goes back to what we were talking about, which is common signs and shared language. Because how do people know, you are supposed to stop? How do people know that you are not supposed to go when the light is red? That's common language. And there are also a couple of traffic principles here at play, which is, theoretically cars are supposed to yield to pedestrians, and no passing on double yellow lines. It's very interesting because it is definitely a much more cluttered Market Street with lots of signs, lots of regulations. And one of the things that I'm looking into is it would be interesting to know the capacity difference between Market Street today and Market Street from about 100 years ago. Actually, I've been looking into it, which is there's We have actually a very specific agency that helps us. Yeah, the traffic data is from the Metropolitan Transportation Commission of California. So if anybody wants to, dive into that with me, like I would love to have a partner in crime. All right, so next up, more transportation. Has anybody ever wondered how airlines load passengers and why they load passengers the way, they load us? So it's very interesting because if you're thinking from a computer science point of view, maybe you're like, oh, it's like LIFO, it's like last in, first out. But thanks to all the information we have on the web and travelers' blogs, and I will say actually there's a figure here on the on the bottom right. That's actually a figure from Mythbusters. If anyone is interested, you can go home and look up this particular Mythbusters episode, and they will tell you the different ways that all of the airlines in our country load passengers, which is back to front, front to back, or they will load all the aisle seats first, and then they will load all the middle seats, and last is actually they'll load all the window seats first, and then aisle, and then middle, and then aisle. And then there's actually multiple variations of that. So there's already 6 variations right here. And I did a survey of how efficient it is versus customer satisfaction. It's interesting because this is the Mythbusters way of compiling data and looking at it. But from a user experience point of view, we can actually also look at actual travelers' blogs. There are lots and lots of people who blog specifically about their travels. If you go to Flyer Talk or Boarding Area, there are bloggers who write, oh, I took this trip, from Dallas to Florida, and this is how the boarding went, and there will be people who chime in the comments. And you can say, well, that's very interesting because I will read a particular comment, which is somebody talking about the Southwest way of boarding. He says, shockingly enough, boarding was not only civilized, but faster than I've seen on any other airline because the seats are all first come, first serve. People are motivated to move fast and choose a seat before all the good ones are gone. Kind of brilliant, kind of really stressful. So this is referring to Southwest Airlines, which, does not assign seats still, but they're now actually assigning boarding areas. Yes?
Yeah, and I was going to say, at least now we do it in chunks, which
Right.
is a lot more.
And if you look at,
Because some people are new, you might not realize that what we like to do is audio tape the questions as well as the talk. So I'll hold this, and if somebody wants to speak up, that's fine.
that's great. Yes, so actually what Southwest is doing right now, which is not assigning the seats, but separating people into boarding blocks, that is actually the best compromise between efficiency, which is what the airlines are really trying to achieve, and happiness. Because if you don't even assign people into blocks, that's actually when people are the most unhappy because then it's a mad dash to the front. But it's very interesting because from a user experience perspective, you can actually see everybody who is interested enough in describing their experience, writing about it, and then getting a lot of comments and feedback. And so, it is definitely anecdotal and not scientific, but on top of what the airline data, are, like you can actually go back and look at how people are reacting to these experiences themselves. So speaking of seats, actually, so the thing about having a seat on an airline, it's very interesting because it is definitely, when you travel on a flight, you're definitely going through a lot of public spaces before you go to your designated personal space that is your seat on the airplane. And the next thing that we want to talk about is architecture, which is about even more personal space. So something that I have always been interested in looking at is, well, what makes a space suitable for a person, a family, or more? So we have architecture regulations, that tell us, okay, like a room without a window cannot be a bedroom, or like, you have to have certain accessibility attributes to like an apartment. That's great. But I wanted to think a little bit more about what has to be inside an apartment in order for it to be considered, something that's suitable for a human. So you can see the middle top picture. That's, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the small house movement. That's one of Jay Schaefer's 4 lights models, and it's a very, very small house. I'm gonna like look for the precise square footage. I think it's 115 square foot. So 115 square foot, and it contains very small kitchenette, your own private bathroom, and a bed on a loft, storage, and there's even a little bit of an entertaining space for you to share with your friends who might come and visit. So you might want to be outdoors. And then bottom right is actually similar idea, except this is in Tokyo, the Nakagen Capsule Towers. Some of you might know of this. This is very iconic architecture. This was built originally in 1972 for single Japanese salarymen, and it contains, a single bedroom or, single room studio apartment with an airplane-style bathroom, and it comes equipped with a refrigerator, a TV, and a bunch of appliances that people thought were essential to a single person living by themselves in the 70s. And actually, last but not least, to the left, this is about the same size as actually the J. Schaefer house and also the capsule apartment, this is for a family of 4 in Hong Kong. This has actually been released by like the Society for Community Organization in Hong Kong. And it's talking about how space is at an extreme premium. And sometimes living conditions are extremely cramped. This is a family of 4 with bunk beds and a lot of storage, and at the same time, they still have a communal table in the middle. So the idea of what, is a suitable space for one person or actually like a family, it really changes. And it's interesting because I'm going to show you more about this particular tower. So like I said, these are capsules, and this is actually back when it was first built, because I don't think it looks like this today anymore. These are capsules for single men working in Tokyo, and they were thinking that, if you had a TV, a refrigerator, and washer dryer, it would actually, really help you, live your own self-sufficient life in Tokyo. It's been 40 years, and it's very interesting because I should say that, like, at this point, the capsule apartments are mostly empty, but there's still people who are living in it, and you can see that even though everything is very standardized, the people who are living in it, they have turned it into, whatever individual spaces that they desire for their home environments. So you can see that, there's people who have totally, like turned this into something that you would see in The Fifth Element for Bruce Willis's apartment. There are people who have turned it into some sort of like a library style apartment. And then there are people who are like, you know what, I just want a big screen. So that was actually talking about space for one person, and space that was designed very specifically for a single person to occupy. I want to talk a little bit about how the idea of what's good for one person and what is good for a residential setting, it actually can change very rapidly. So to my left, that's the Farnsworth House by Mies van der Rohe. A very iconic house built for a female professor in Illinois. And it was one of its kind, and probably one of the first houses like this where there was so much glass and you can really see into the house. It's a residence for a woman. And to the right, there's the glass house, which, partly inspired by the Farnsworth House. Philip Johnson, the architect, he built it for himself and his partner. And he also built the companion piece, which is the brick house, which is completely enclosed. You can't really see inside it. And, it's for his guests. So it's interesting because, the Farnsworth House and the glass house, they're built for individuals, basically custom made, and really, really high end, not mass produced. Now in the center, actually, this is almost only 5 years later, this is a brochure for an Eichler. And this is for a family. This is a family that's middle class, or actually probably going towards middle class, not quite middle class yet, probably freshly moved to California, not originally here. And it's interesting because Eichlers are prefab, so they're not built on site. It's not something that like was very custom made and very high end. No, actually, these were, massively manufactured for all the Eichler communities that we have today within amongst us. Actually grew up in one of these Eichlers, so it's very interesting to know how quickly, within a span of, like less than a decade, something that was very outrageous, very avant-garde, all of a sudden it became normal for our family. So retail is actually, since we were talking so much about glass, I wanted to talk a little bit about retail. And here I'm actually not going to really switch any slides because I'm still researching this part. But there are a couple of things I want to talk about, which is I'm very interested in the role that glass has actually played in American retail stores. I don't know if anybody has been looking into mid-century retail designs, but there's a book by Stephen Heller called Shop America, which has excellent plans for how you should plan out a nail salon, a floral shop, a grocery store, any kind of store that you can imagine. And it's very interesting because as you flip through this book, you keep looking and looking and looking, and you realize after a while that in fact it's essentially a glass catalog, because almost all of the stores are designed in such a way that there's very little distance between you and the merchandise that's being offered. I'm going to read a quote from Shop America, which is, "The barrier between the sidewalk and the store practically disappears. The only thing between the shopper and the product was glass." And you can read all about how we really in the middle of last century, I guess, revolutionized glass in a way that it's really translucent, it is perfect for product display, and it ushers in this new era of consumerism. So if anybody has any resources on how glass is continuously used or used today, I would love to know. Something else I wanted to note with this picture is, so this is, I don't know, everyone probably can tell that it's an Apple store. And it's interesting because when we're thinking about common symbols and signals that tell you where you are and how you might be able to get help, in an Apple store, it is definitely the blue shirts. And it's funny because I think the first time I saw this, I immediately thought, oh, does this work with like red shirts? And sure enough, it does over Christmas. Okay. All right, so then I'm actually going to seg into something a little bit different, which is about education. I don't know if we have any educators here who teach day in and day out. It's an incredibly amazing job to do. I am not able to do it, so I'm like extremely impressed by anyone who has been teaching for a long period of time. I can tell you that as somebody who is working with education and social, I have a couple of lessons that I have learned myself through teaching, and it's very interesting because it's not something that I would have ever expected. So here they are. So first of all, which is knowledge does not equal teaching ability, which I think many of us probably know. Just because you know something doesn't mean that you can teach it. But I was really, really surprised by the difference between one-to-one learning versus one-to-end learning. So something that you can go back to the Railsbridge workshop, which is usually in a group of 5 to 10 people, we're trying to learn how to program. They're paired with a person who is teaching and a TA. And you would just see that it's very, like the number of people who are in the small subgroup, it actually slows down the overall progress of the group in a way that you would not imagine. And you would actually constantly, this is why we were paired in twos, which is, either the TA or the teacher would actually constantly have to go and sort of like help the people who are struggling and, like say, okay, I'm gonna actually work with you one-on-one right now and help you catch up. There are a lot of strategies to do this, which is, okay, if we cannot scale things so that we have a one-to-one ratio of people who are teaching versus people who are learning, what could we do? Some of the things that I learned were, you would actually try to have individual TA time, or you would try to have like an installment fest or like a question and answer fest, like before crucial segments of the workshop, and just sort of catch everybody out at the same time. But what I'm really, really interested in is how people can actually learn to teach each other things. Because to rely on a single central teacher who is teaching somebody, it is really something that is never going to scale. So something that we tried to figure out and tried to experiment with was curriculums and symbols. So this goes back to, what are the common, symbols and the common concepts that we could actually show people so that when they meet something new, let's say that they were going through a curriculum that they have no idea how to tackle, they would actually have anchors, for example, concepts or things that they have seen before that would help them, navigate this curriculum. So I guess if you go back to the retail idea, which is, when you're in the Apple store, how do you know, where to get help if you're lost, right? So you look for the blue shirts. And in the classroom, it's interesting. You know to ask the teacher for help. But since we're not able to staff a classroom with the same ratio of blue shirts to, customers and, teachers to students, what are some other strategies that could be applied? Some of the things that I have found that have worked really well in project-based learning is asking the students, what have you tried? And let's do it together to each other. Meaning that, then they actually stop relying on the teacher as much as they used to, and then they can probably discover things together. But in any case, I'm looking for strategies on how people handle this because, like I said, it is really incredibly difficult to scale the ratio of teaching staff to students. So, yes.
So I used to be a technical instructor, and when you go into a course at a company or something, maybe twice in my whole career was everybody at the same level.
Right.
Usually there were people who knew more than I did, and there were people who didn't have the prerequisites. So I would say, oh, well, this is going to be a workshop. We're going to pair up.
Teach each other, yes. That's great. So actually, we're actually going towards the end, which is, I wanted to leave us with a story, actually, something that I learned from the Exploratorium. So one of the reasons why I've really gone down this road of how can you balance an individual experience with, a group experience is because of something I learned from the principal investigator at the geometry playground. And actually, he presented this work, I think at UX Week one year. So someone at Adaptive Path put it up, and I'm so glad because now you can actually all look at it online. But I'll read it, which is, so this is Joshua Gutwell from the Exploratorium. He says, what we noticed is at an exhibit with one seat, if a boy was sitting in the seat engaged with the exhibit and a boy and a girl were waiting, the boy would continue his work with the exhibit until he was finished. If, however, a girl was sitting in the seat engaged in the exhibit and the children were waiting, then, even when she hadn't finished her work, she would leave the seat to give the next child waiting a turn. He goes on to say that at the Exploratorium, the goal of the museum staff is to design the exhibits for everybody. However, when they discovered that this is what the girls were doing, that they were leaving and getting up before finishing their work, what they did is that they discovered if the exhibit had a bench with two seats, then when two girls, or a boy or a girl, were both sitting together, they would finish their work before passing the turn to the next child. So just by adding a seat, the small change led to both boys and girls maintaining their engagement and completing their experience. It's a very, very tiny thing, but it is something that actually, has a great impact. And it keeps the goal of, designing for, an individual and also designing for groups in mind. So that's it. And, I would love to hear feedback and, questions on what else to look at. Oh, really quick. I have a small bibliography of the things that I've been looking at. So if anyone is interested in any of the books I was referencing, there's the Stephen Heller book, which is the Shop America book. Bruno Latour also wrote a very interesting book called Reassembling the Social, and it's an introduction to actor network theory. The Road to Clarity is an article by Joshua Yaffa in the New York Times, and it actually talks about how we sort of evolved and designed our highway signage system so that people know what to do on American highways. So that's it.
Hi, Jenny.
Yes.
You mentioned the use of glass in retail settings.
Mm-hmm.
I have seen, and this is something that I really liked, is projection onto glass as part of their marketing,
Yeah.
either static images or video.
Okay. Do you have like a specific example of like, is like in a mall or like?
Yeah, I think the first time I saw it, it was at Nordstrom, but after that, I've seen it in more than one location now,
Okay.
in other stores.
Good to know. Thank you. Actually, note that down.
Okay, great. So, referring to the educational references, the thing you said about learning together, it makes me think of Khan Academy and such, where the presentation of the information is available.
Right.
And I'll bet that what you're discussing is more about how you get through practical applications of the information
Correct.
maybe in a shared way. And what's the best angle to make it shared? What have you tried?
Wait, actually, can you rephrase that? What do you mean by what's the best angle to make it shared? Like,
So I think if you agree with me that there's a presentation available of the information from the instructor, from Khan Academy or from whatever, and instead what you're saying is if people who are trying to make practical use of the information that they've gained, how do they what are the best strategies to get them to share the burden or to work together?
right. Okay. So I can tell you that there are a lot of people who are actually trying to solve this problem. Something that's really important is that you have to match people in time and space, in the sense that they have to be interested in the same material, trying to more or less do the same thing, and be at a level where they're not so far apart that they can't understand each other. On Khan Academy, I've seen, it's interesting because like on some of the most popular videos, I've seen people leave all sorts of comments, actually, asking questions or like trying to, connect with other people. And you see this on YouTube videos too, actually. There are a lot of how-to videos on YouTube, and you would actually you would see pages and pages of comments of people asking each other questions. I don't know, it's very interesting because the idea of, having material that you can then use as a basis for like, like a how-to, or like, you're trying to, like you said, do a practical application, I think that's something that a lot of people want. I don't know if there's something that really exists right now because I'm really sure that the internet would actually give us something like this because, the world is really big. There are lots of connected people. Somebody has got to want the same thing as you do around the same time. But it doesn't quite, it doesn't quite exist yet. Maybe Mocha will be something like that in the future. But, it's actually something that it really requires that, two people, are interested in the same material and more or less paired.
Hi, thank you. So staying kind of on the comments and kind of, I don't know, trying to co-create some knowledge or whatever, but tying it to some of the other things you spoke about, like when you're talking about a street, you have all these signals, this sort of common language, and it seems so far on a broad majority, if not all websites that most people are likely to encounter, the only signal they have is a box and then the word comment above it. And I guess you could consider other people's comments a signal that you should say something as well. But I'm wondering, like, when you try to explore different ways to get people to share information, do you explore other types of signals you can give rather than just a box that says say anything?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And it's very interesting too. When you think about, so there's the comment box, which is, comment box came before Facebook likes, came before like Pinterest and any of that other stuff, or Delicious. So the comment box, very direct. I am actually really sure that the web is going to become more annotated. It's just that right now, it's still very primitive because like this technology, it's not that old yet. And I think even the comments, they work semi-okay. They just don't scale because once you have, like more than 2 or 3 pages of comments, then there's just no way to go back. And, I think what is really important actually is to figure out how you would surface the relevant comments or how you would float things to the top because like you can keep commenting. I wonder if Discuss has something that would actually help you, but I know what you're
They
trying-
don't, no.
I know what you're trying to get at, but I'm just thinking that, it's interesting because I feel like the thing about the internet is that if enough people want something, then it actually will happen. Enough people wanted to bookmark things and like, Delicious happened, Pinterest happened, and there's different ways to mark, annotate content and find people who are interested in the same content. I'm trying to think though, if there's a way to make it more real time because all of these like comments and, tags and like, bookmarks and stuff, they're sort of asynchronous as in, you might leave a comment and somebody like, might discover it like, like a week later. And by then you've moved on from there. So that's something I'm actually really interested to figure out, like, how can you, but I think actually I think Discuss actually notifies you when somebody comments on something you already like, marked. Does it
But
not?
it's still in that case, they're not changing the conversation. In the example you gave in a classroom or teaching, someone is there to sort of moderate. They're sort of saying, here's what we can talk about, here's how we can talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
And they're the signal, right? They're the sign saying you can't go left here.
Mhm.
You wait, talk about this, and then continue on.
Yeah.
Whereas the comment box is just, it's the streetcar street scene from
Right.
1906.
Yeah.
And you can look at even places that attempt to be all about commenting and collaboration.
Yeah.
It's just like OpenIDEO is a perfect example, right? One of the most successful design firms in the world. OpenIDEO essentially just like, here's my great idea, and they encourage it. It won't work unless people comment, and yet the only way they have to comment is again this empty box.
Right.
There's no signal. It's not saying what's a constructive way. And the only people I found that were doing this, and this was years ago, I don't know if they're still doing it, was the Institute for the Future had a model that they were using called the Foresight Engine.
Okay.
And it was all about people doing like collaborative stuff, just like an OpenIDEO. But rather than just having the ability to simply comment,
Uh-huh.
instead of, I can't remember all the choices they gave you, but it was, you could counter, you could build, like onto like kind of, like, when people are saying like in a meeting, I'd like to piggyback on so-and-so's
Mhm.
idea. There were like 4 different modes by which you could comment.
Wait,
Right.
but so, I mean, I'm gonna just say that I think you can actually do the +1s and stuff like that.
Right, yeah.
Discuss. I'm really sure that.
Right, you can vote, which essentially becomes a form of
Right.
moderation, but it doesn't actually signal you into constructive ways of actually using this tool. And I'm wondering if anybody in the room has encountered any way where it's something other than just an empty box
Oh,
for
up
people
and
to
up.
shout in or whatever they want to.
Yes.
Well, to add on to that discussion, I wonder, like, a lot of times in customer surveys, people will want to give a compliment or a complaint, and they label it themselves. But what it turns out, the compliment turns into a complaint. It's all mixed. So I wonder if people are self-selecting what kind of comment they're making, or it would be good if it were detected somehow and categorized.
Well,
Yeah,
no, actually, I was just gonna say, I find it really interesting, right? This idea that you can actually edit and morph the symbols in real time, and sort of collaboratively build upon like what is like the right things to follow. I mean, it's awesome.
So I think that, I don't know if you've looked at them, but there are many collaboration platforms. And, for example, I'm a tech writer. I've been using a shared review platform where people can make comments of various kinds and other people can reply, or, you know, shared document platforms, and all of those have to serve both the individual and the group.
Yes, I would agree with that. Definitely any sort of like Google Docs, Asana, and all of those things, yeah. Yes?
Actually, I have sort of more of a question, but in the different sort of dimensions that you looked at, or maybe the verticals you could call them, where a many-to-many experience is not simply a series of one-off experience, you know, the complex dynamic of group behavior. Are you, in doing this like exploration and looking at these different examples, are you starting to see any commonalities, any sort of thematic things? I know you brought in some principles like the game principles and things like that, but are you, is anything starting to bubble up from this kind of comparison across these different example areas?
You mean for how these disciplines handle groups, or?
Yeah, in particular, and I mean, I guess in the sense is, are there lessons that are transportable from one of the, you know, one of the areas to another, or things that are deeper themes that seem to be repeating themselves or showing up in
Right.
different forms?
Well, I'm going to go out on a limb and talk a little bit about amusement parks, because actually that was actually one of the disciplines that really got me started in the first place. I don't have that much research on amusement parks yet, but I find them extremely interesting because many amusement parks are very family-friendly atmospheres, but they're also designed to, you know, accommodate the single amusement park visitor. And it's very interesting because maybe the amusement park actually, you know, exhibits this more, but I really think that any discipline, you know, whether it's transportation or architecture or entertainment parks, I'm starting to get the sense that the exceptions and the rules, they all reflect the values that, you know, like this particular culture wants to celebrate. Like, we're a very family-friendly culture, but we also want to celebrate the individual. So, you know, we don't want people to feel left out, and we want people to, you know, be like, well, you know, you're here by yourself. You can actually, you know, go ahead and, you know, zoom past all these families. So it's, it's one of those things where, and it's interesting because in India, actually, let me go back to this slide, which is, somebody was telling me, I was, you know, going through the transportation slide. Oh, is it not going anywhere? So, I just want to talk about this, which is, you know, there is actually a rhythm here. You can go from like one end of Market Street to the other end. There are no laws, but the people who are navigating the street, they know how to actually, they know how to go down Market Street. And somebody was telling me that when they were traveling in India, it was sort of like that. There were not very many signs. There were, you know, a lot of, you know, traffic, but people, they knew how to navigate the traffic. And he said that the thing about the law at work was that, you know, whoever had the biggest vehicle got to go first. So that's okay. I mean, that's actually like, that's a principle, right? And so, you know, we as a society decided that, well, we wanted something a little bit different. Maybe, you know, we will yield to pedestrians. But it's something, you know, either way, you know, it's like all of these systems, they're designed to move people or components, or maybe in the future computers, whatever. They're designed to move things from point A to point B. And it is just a matter of, you know, like how it's done. And so for us, you know, we end up with the transportation systems that we have because of the values that we have. And same thing with education and other things like, you know, architecture. So, but that's really just sort of a gut feeling. Like, I have not done a lot of empirical research to say, you know, well, we have, you know, because it's also something that's very much, it's sort of like a self-enforcing loop, so it's hard to say, where things begin and things
So you
end.
might need to do some like cross-cultural, or not you, but those of us interested in
Possibly
this.
not me, yes.
Yeah. But someone needs to maybe look across cultures and see, again, are there common threads and others that seem much more mediated by the culture itself?
I would love to actually have people come. I mean, if BayCHI wants to invite people to, come and talk about how transportation works in Japan, transportation works in Europe, I mean, I'd love to hear those talks.
Hi, Jenny. Thanks for the talk. I am an architect trying to shift to UX design, so this was quite relevant. And can't help but notice certain themes also connecting the different areas. For instance, like an excess of signals. You mentioned that in this photo, for instance, you pointed out all the signs, and Malcolm Gladwell did that study of how excess signals can actually cause problems for traffic.
Oh, yeah.
Right? So it's also the case for education, too, when you have more teachers than necessary. I used to teach high school students about architecture, and the more teachers we put in the room, the more each student would make us stay with them at their desk. So it didn't seem really effective. Or at Yale, they opened up this cross-disciplinary center for engineering and architecture, or art, and they just filled this huge room with projectors and all kinds of state-of-the-art equipment, but basically segmented the class, and you didn't know which projector to look at, or which TV screen, or which microphone to speak into. So it was just an excess of signals. But then Christian brought up the interesting point where there is a cultural difference. For instance, some cultures might actually appreciate choices, like having more choices, and other cultures feel less satisfaction when they have too many choices. So that would be an interesting thing to look into.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. Actually.
No?
It's kind of a silly question, but I was wondering what your experience was growing up in an Eichler house, because I have friends that moved into one and they feel very exposed, like they're in a
Yes.
fishbowl.
Well, actually, so for those of you who are not familiar with Eichler houses, the back of an Eichler house, it is exactly like this picture. So the back is, you're exposing yourself to the backyard. But the front of the house is actually not exposed at all because there's no windows on the street-facing side. And I can tell you that it is something that my parents couldn't, they were just like, no windows at all, like on the street-facing side, really? But I think you do get used to it. What you love is how much sunlight pours into your house. And the radiant heating is really nice. Yes?
I also spent part of my childhood in an Eichler house in San Jose, and it is important to point out that this elevation that you're looking at here is very much pointed to the backyard, and the backyards of the neighborhoods were traditional American backyards with a high fence, very private space. So there wasn't really a sense. If you have a friend that's moved into an Eichler now and feels exposed, it's possible that the treatment of the yard has changed in the intervening 40 years to change how this design relates to the neighborhood. So that would be interesting to look into, to see whether the houses that tend to sit in one place and stay relatively unmodified are changed in their nature by the neighborhood that they sit in changing more radically. The other thing that I'd point out about Eichlers that's not evident from this photo, and probably most people know this, is that not only was the back very much, there was a lot of glass on the back, the master bedroom was on the back and had a large sliding door that was all glass, in addition to the living room area that you see here. But in addition to those features, there also was a large central atrium, and the atrium let in light, and the walls around that atrium on two sides were all glass. Mm-hmm. So it was a radical design. I think the reason that the street side facade was sort of blank is, and it did have a strip of high windows, was that that wasn't, I don't think that was the point that Eichler was trying to make. Eichler was recognizing neighborhoods for what they were becoming. When I grew up in an Eichler house, all of us kids were out in the street running around on our bicycles. 10 years later, nobody left their house to meet their neighbors.
Yeah.
And Eichler might have actually sort of, I don't know if he drove that, but he may have anticipated that tendency in our culture and made the fronts of the house blank simply because he thought they were irrelevant. And of course, also, half of the house was given over to servicing the cars on the front facade.
So, Steve, I want to correct you. That's a typical California backyard with a 6-foot fence. Where I grew up, there were 5-foot fences, and I've lived in places where there were no fences,
No
and the
fence.
kids ran from backyard to backyard.
I moved from San Jose to Cedar Rapids, Iowa. There were no fences whatsoever in the neighborhood in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. So you're probably right that suburbanism in California, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.